Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The call should have ended 15 minutes earlier. My name is Vanessa Holloway, and I was sitting at my kitchen table in Atlanta with one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, and the other holding my phone so tightly my fingers ached. Damon had called from his truck to ask whether Layla's extra cleats were in the hall closet or the garage bin. We talked for less than a minute before he said Cedric was calling on the other line and he would ring me back. I heard the soft click that usually meant a call was ending, but my screen stayed lit. Then I heard Damon's voice again, farther away now, like he had set the phone down without realizing I was still connected. He had hit merge through his truck screen instead of disconnecting me, and I became the person no wife ever wants to be. The silent third voice on her husband's private call. "I am telling you, I cannot keep doing this," Damon said. His words came through clearly enough that I could hear the scrape of his office chair and the restless pacing that followed. Every morning I walk into that house and act like I know what the next 10 years are supposed to look like. Another baby, a bigger mortgage, family trips, school applications. I cannot breathe in that life anymore. Cedric said something low that I could not catch, and Damon answered more sharply. "No, I have not told Vanessa yet. I know how that sounds. I know it is wrong. But I have already talked to 2 lawyers, and I have another consultation Thursday. I need facts before I blow up my daughter's life." My chest turned to stone. The coffee mug trembled in my hand so hard that a dark line spilled over the rim and onto the table. Cedric's voice came through next, steady and uneasy. "You are talking about walking away from a wife who loves you and a little girl who worships you." Damon let out a tired breath. "That is what is killing me. Vanessa is a good woman. She is smart, she is beautiful, she has held this house together for years, and any man would be lucky to have her. But I am not happy. I have not been happy for a long time. We are polite. We are functional. We get Layla to school and pay the bills and talk about groceries and soccer, and who is picking up dry cleaning. That is not a marriage. It feels like I am performing one." Cedric asked him whether anything had actually happened, whether there had been cheating or some big fight. Damon said no. That almost made it worse. If there had been a visible crack, I could have named it. Instead, he was quietly planning to leave me while I was still calling it a future. Then he said the part that cut deepest. "She keeps talking about trying again," he said. "Every time we get another negative test, she looks at me like I am the one steady thing in the room. She cries, I hold her, and inside I am thinking I do not even know if I want to be there in 6 months. What kind of man does that make me?" I pressed my free hand against my stomach without thinking. We had been trying for another baby for half a year. I had saved nursery ideas on my laptop. I had folded away 2 tiny neutral-colored onesies from Layla's baby clothes because I could not bring myself to give them away. Damon had rubbed my back after every disappointment and told me timing would come together when it was supposed to. Now I realized he had been comforting me with one arm while building an exit with the other. Cedric asked him whether counseling was on the table. Damon did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone flat. "I do not even know if it would be honest to start counseling when I have already been looking at apartments." My throat closed. I toured one place in Decatur last week and another near Brookhaven. Close enough for shared custody. Far enough that I would not feel like I was living in the shadow of my own house. Cedric muttered his name like a warning, but Damon kept going. "I have been pricing everything out. Rent. Utilities. What child support might look like. What it would cost to split things cleanly. I am trying to do this the least destructive way possible." That was the moment something inside me stopped pleading and started listening with perfect, brutal clarity. He was not confused. He was prepared. I do not remember hanging up. I only remember the silence after the line went dead and the terrible brightness of my kitchen. The refrigerator still held Layla's spelling test, our grocery list, and a smiling family picture from the lake the summer before. Damon had his arms around both of us in that picture. Layla was missing her front teeth and laughing so hard her eyes were squeezed shut. I had believed the warmth in that photo meant something solid. Now it looked like evidence from a different woman's life. I sat there until I heard the side door from the garage open and Layla calling for me from the mudroom, fresh from her sleepover at my cousin Rochelle's house. Her voice was cheerful and careless and 7 years old. I wiped my face even though no tears had fallen yet, and went to meet my daughter before my marriage could collapse in front of her. Layla came barreling through the foyer with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and a stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. She stopped when she saw me and grinned. "Can we make pancakes?" she asked. Rochelle only had cereal and fruit, and I wanted real breakfast. I bent down and hugged her so hard she squirmed and laughed, and told me I was crushing her. For one wild second, I wanted to hold on forever, to keep her right there in the safe little window before the world started telling her grown people could lie with straight faces. "Pancakes it is," I said. I heard my own voice and almost hated how normal it sounded. By the time I cracked eggs into a bowl, I had already made one decision. Damon was not going to get to stroll into our kitchen one random evening, present me with a neat speech, and act like he had simply reached a difficult conclusion. If he wanted to leave me, he was going to answer for how he planned it. The next 4 days felt like living inside a stage play where I was the only person who had seen the last page of the script. Damon came home from work on Monday and kissed my cheek. He asked Layla about school, complimented the salmon I made for dinner, and carried a basket of laundry upstairs while humming under his breath. On Tuesday, he texted me a photo of yellow roses from the grocery store and asked whether I wanted him to pick some up because they looked like my grandmother's garden. On Wednesday, he brought them home without waiting for my answer. I stood in the kitchen holding that bouquet and thinking about the apartment tours he had hidden from me. He smiled and said he did not need an occasion to buy flowers for his wife. I smiled back because I was not ready to show my hand, but inside I felt something colder than grief. I felt studied. I watched him more carefully than I ever had in our marriage. Once the shock burned off, details started rising that I had ignored before. He checked his phone in the driveway before he came inside, as if he needed a minute to settle his face. He had become oddly protective of his work bag, always bringing it all the way into our bedroom instead of dropping it by the office door the way he used to. Twice I woke up after midnight and found his side of the bed empty. The first time he was downstairs scrolling through something on his laptop at the kitchen island. The second time he was sitting on the back patio in the dark with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles looked pale. When I asked if he was okay, he said he had just been thinking about deadlines. I had spent years trusting the first answer he gave me. Now every answer sounded like a cover story. Saturday morning I took Layla to soccer by myself because Damon said he had a site visit and could not make it. I sat on a folding chair near the halfway line and watched my daughter chase the ball with the fierce concentration of a child who still believed effort could fix almost anything. The sun was already sharp, and parents around me traded snacks, sunscreen, and weekend gossip. Tamika, one of the other mothers, sat beside me and said Layla was getting fast enough to run track too. I heard myself say Damon had been saying the same thing. The words came out automatically, like muscle memory from a marriage where every future plan used to belong to both of us. After the game, Layla wanted peach cobbler ice cream from the little shop near Grant Park. She talked the whole time about her almost goal and whether Daddy would come next week. I said I hoped so. What I did not say was that by then he might be halfway out the door with a furnished one-bedroom and a custody calendar. That night he was almost unbearably attentive. He made barbecue chicken the way Layla liked it, extra sauce on the side. He played a board game after dinner and let her beat him twice. He read 3 bedtime stories instead of 1 and did all the character voices until she laughed herself breathless. Then he came downstairs, sat beside me on the couch, and asked if I wanted to plan a family trip before summer ended. Charleston, he suggested. Or Savannah again. Somewhere with a waterfront and enough space for Layla to run around. I turned to look at him because I needed to understand the mind of a man who could browse apartments on Thursday and discuss family vacations on Saturday. He smiled when he caught me staring and tucked one braid behind my ear. "You okay?" he asked. There are moments when cruelty looks exactly like tenderness if the person delivering it knows your habits. On the 4th night after the call, I stopped pretending my instincts needed more time. I woke before dawn, lay staring at the ceiling, and thought about every woman in my family who had ever taught me that love was holy, but self-respect had to live in the same house with it. Then I got up and started looking for proof I could stand on. Not because I wanted to punish Damon. Not yet. I needed to know whether what I overheard had been panic or planning. He left for work at 7:30, kissed Layla's forehead, and told me not to forget the parent email from school. 20 minutes later, I was in our home office with the door shut, the quiet buzzing around me like a warning. His work laptop was gone, and the desktop tower he used for home projects had a new password. That stopped me for all of 3 seconds. I did not need a confession from a computer if he had already been moving in the physical world. The first clue was in the trash can beside his desk. Someone had torn up a sheet of paper too quickly, leaving large pieces instead of confetti. I crouched, pulled them out, and pieced together enough to read temporary parenting schedule, alternating weekends, and the partial letterhead of a family law firm on Peachtree Street. My hands shook once, then steadied. I opened the bottom desk drawer and found a plain manila folder under a stack of contractor invoices. Inside were 2 brochures from apartment complexes, 1 application receipt for a $275 holding fee, and a handwritten legal pad page listing rent estimates, internet service, furniture basics, and child support projection. He had used our joint bank debit card for the application fee. That meant the deception had not just lived in his head. He had funded it with our money. I still did not have the whole chain, so I kept going. Damon and I shared the household tablet for bills, school forms, and the wireless printer app. In the printer history, I found 3 documents he had sent from his email late at night over the previous month: a consultation intake form from Mercer Family Law, a custody worksheet, and a PDF titled Questions to Ask Before Filing. The app still showed thumbnails of the first pages. I took screenshots and sent them to a private folder in my cloud drive. Then I logged into our joint checking account and searched recent transactions. There they were: a consultation fee, a separate charge from a record service, and the apartment application. None of them were huge alone. Together they told the truth he had been trying to make sound civilized on the phone. While I was comparing preschool waitlists for a future child, he was building a budget for life after me. What broke me was not the legal language. It was the browser receipt in the folder from a furniture rental company. He had selected a sofa, a dining table, and a twin bed. A twin bed. Not even a full. He had been imagining a place for our daughter to sleep when she visited him, and he had done it without ever sitting across from me and saying our marriage was in danger. He had been designing an alternate home for Layla before he had given me a single honest chance to fight for the one we already had. I took photos of every page, put the papers back exactly the way I found them, and stood in that office breathing through the ache in my chest until I could trust myself to move. When Layla called from upstairs that she could not find her other sock, I tucked my phone away, climbed the stairs, and helped my daughter get ready for school like my entire life had not just been translated into evidence. I made it through work by force. I sat through campaign meetings, answered emails, and approved a media schedule for a regional client, while my mind kept returning to that rented twin bed and the holding fee on the apartment. At lunch, I drove to my mother's house in East Atlanta because if I stayed in my office one more minute, I was going to split down the center. My mother, Patrice Walker, was in her backyard clipping herbs from pots lined along the fence. She looked up the moment I pulled into the driveway and said my name in the tone mothers use when they know the truth is standing beside you before you speak. I told her everything. The call, the lawyers, the apartment receipts, the fact that Damon had used our joint money while still sleeping beside me and holding me after negative pregnancy tests. She did not interrupt once. She just kept getting quieter. When I finished, my mother set down her gardening shears and sat across from me on the porch swing. "Do not let anybody talk you into calling this simple confusion," she said. "A man can be lost without being dishonest. Your husband chose dishonesty." I started crying then, not loud, just the helpless leaking kind that comes when someone finally names the injury correctly. "I do not know if I want to save this or burn it down," I admitted. "Both feelings can sit in the same body," she said. "You do not have to decide today whether the marriage lives. You only need to decide whether he will be allowed to keep controlling the story." I asked her what she would do. She leaned back and looked out over the yard before answering. "I would make him tell the truth all the way through. Not the polished version. Not the noble version. The whole ugly thing. Then I would decide whether that truth had enough life in it to rebuild anything." I drove home with more steadiness than I had felt all week. That evening Damon came in carrying takeout from our favorite Thai place and kissed my forehead like a man who believed he was still managing a complicated but containable problem. Layla cheered when she saw the paper bags, and I watched him smile at her with a softness that made my anger sharper, not smaller. After dinner, when Layla went upstairs to shower, I stood at the sink rinsing plates and said, "I have been thinking we should see a marriage counselor." Damon froze for half a beat before he turned toward me. It was tiny, but I saw it. The color shifted in his face. He recovered fast and asked if something was wrong. I told him not necessarily, but I thought we had been moving through life like efficient co-workers instead of husband and wife. It was the truest lie I had ever told. He said that sounded smart and mature and maybe overdue. He agreed too quickly, like a man relieved to be offered a cleaner road than confession. I chose the counselor myself. Dr. Felicia Grant had an office in Buckhead and a reputation for asking the questions people came in hoping to avoid. Before the appointment, Damon became extra careful with me. He came home earlier twice. He volunteered to handle Layla's bedtime on session day. He even asked if I wanted to go out to dinner the weekend after. Every thoughtful gesture only deepened the split inside me. Part of me remembered the man I had laughed with for 9 years, the one who danced in the kitchen and knew how to calm Layla after nightmares and rubbed my back on long car rides. Another part of me could not stop seeing the legal pad where he had itemized his escape. By the time we sat on Dr. Grant's couch, I felt less like a wife trying to save a marriage and more like a witness waiting to see whether the defendant would tell the truth voluntarily. Dr. Grant started gently. She asked how long we had been married, what we loved about each other, what had changed. Damon let me answer first on almost every question, and that irritated me more than I expected. Even there, in a room built for honesty, he was looking to me to carry the emotional labor of opening the conversation. When Dr. Grant asked him what he valued about our marriage, he said almost the exact same thing I had heard on the phone with Cedric. He said I was smart, beautiful, accomplished, and an amazing mother. Dr. Grant nodded and said those were lovely things to say about a person, but what she wanted to understand was what he valued about our relationship. Damon went quiet. The silence stretched. Then he said we rarely fought, we had built a stable home, and we were good parents. I watched Dr. Grant notice what I had already learned. He could describe our structure more easily than our bond. He finally admitted he had been feeling disconnected for a long time. He said sometimes he felt reduced to a provider and a father, and that he no longer knew where he fit in my emotional life outside of tasks and responsibility. Some of what he said landed, because it was not entirely false. There had been years when we spoke more often about schedules than dreams. Years when exhaustion had replaced curiosity. But even as I listened, the folder in my memory kept pulsing like a second conversation beneath the one in the room. Dr. Grant asked if either of us had considered leaving. Damon's jaw tightened. He said, I have had thoughts about whether this is still working. Thoughts? I almost laughed. He had not said thoughts to a lawyer. He had said consultation, custody, apartment, projection, holding fee. I let him keep his softer word for one session only because I wanted to see how far he would go if no one stopped him. After the appointment, Dr. Grant gave us an exercise. No logistics talk for 20 minutes each evening, only personal questions. What kept you up last night? What are you afraid of right now? What do you miss about who you used to be? Damon held my hand walking to the parking garage as if we had just survived something together. I let him. Then, before he could open my car door, I asked, Is there anything you need to tell me that you did not say in there? He looked startled. Not guilty yet. Just startled. No, he said after a second too long. I mean, not really. I think I said the important part. That lie, delivered after a full hour designed to invite honesty, did more than the phone call had. The call showed me he was willing to hide. That moment showed me he still preferred hiding even when I opened the door and asked him to walk through it. The second session was 6 days later. I had spent that week doing the exercises, answering his questions, listening to his fears, and watching him try to reconnect without once admitting what he had actually done. I also spent that week meeting with a financial advisor at my lunch break and moving half our liquid savings into a separate account under my name, not to punish him, but to make sure no more holding fees left our life without my knowledge. Dr. Grant began session 2 by asking whether we had been able to talk more honestly at home. Damon said yes. I looked at him for 3 full seconds, then reached into my tote bag and pulled out the folder I had built. Screenshots, bank charges, printer logs, apartment brochure photos, and the torn parenting schedule reconstructed on white paper. I set it on the table between us and said, Then let us try that answer again. Damon stared at the folder like it had materialized out of thin air. Dr. Grant's expression sharpened, but she stayed quiet. I opened the first page and said his words plainly because I was done cushioning them. 3 lawyer consultations. An apartment application in Brookhaven. A furniture rental quote with a bed for our daughter. Bank charges from our joint account. Printed custody forms. A call with your brother where you said you had checked out mentally while I was still trying to have a baby with you. Damon's face went completely still. I could see the exact second he realized this was no longer a drifting marriage story he could narrate in abstractions. "Vanessa," he started. I cut him off. "No, you do not get to begin with my name like that. You get to begin with the truth. All the way. And you do it here, where someone else can hear you say it." I have never seen shame move across a face as visibly as it moved across his. Damon put both hands over his mouth, lowered them, and then looked at Dr. Grant instead of me because it was easier. He admitted he had met with lawyers. He admitted he had been researching apartments for nearly 2 months. He admitted he had paid an application fee and toured 2 places. He admitted he had hidden those steps because once he started them, he knew saying them out loud at home would make them real. Dr. Grant asked why he used joint money. He swallowed and said because he told himself he would put it back before I noticed, which somehow made it less like theft in his head. I laughed then, a hard, ugly laugh that shocked even me. So while I was buying ovulation tests and school supplies, I said, "You were financing your escape and planning to reimburse the marriage later?" Damon finally looked at me. His eyes were wet, but I was not in the mood to be moved by tears. "I was a coward," he said. "That is the honest answer. I felt trapped, and instead of trusting you with that, I built a private exit because I was scared if I said any of it out loud, I would become the worst man in the room." I told him he had achieved that anyway. Then I asked the question I had carried like broken glass inside me for days. "When I cried after those negative tests and you held me, had you already talked to a lawyer?" He closed his eyes. "Yes," he said. The room went silent. There are truths that do not need dramatic volume because their shape is violent enough. I looked at Dr. Grant and said, "That is the betrayal." Not that he felt unhappy. That he let me trust his comfort while he was already planning how to divide our daughter's weekends. Dr. Grant did not rescue him. To her credit, she called the deception what it was. She said marriage problems could be mutual, but secret legal planning, financial concealment, and preparing alternate housing while continuing to participate in family-building conversations created a separate injury. She said if there was any path forward, it required more than renewed affection. It required accountability, transparency, and consequences strong enough to match the breach. Damon cried then, quietly, not theatrically. He said he had convinced himself he was being merciful by gathering information before hurting me. I told him mercy would have been telling me the first night he started imagining life somewhere else. By the end of that session, my decision was clear. I was not filing for divorce that day. But I was not going home and climbing into bed beside a man who had measured my daughter's future into alternating weekends either. That night I told Damon he needed to leave the master bedroom immediately and stay with Cedric by the end of the week. Layla did not need details, but she also was not going to live inside a house vibrating with adult rage. He nodded and agreed faster than I expected, which made me say, "Do not mistake my calm for ease. I am calm because if I let myself break the way I want to, you will never find the pieces." He moved into the guest room for 3 nights, and then to Cedric's condo in Midtown. We told Layla Daddy had to stay with Uncle Cedric for a while because Mom and Dad were working through grown-up problems, and both loved her very much. She cried the first night and asked whether she had done something wrong. Damon cried too when he answered no. I watched him tell our daughter the truth she needed and thought, "This is the part you should have been brave enough to picture before you rented that twin bed." Separation did not turn me into a victim waiting by the window. It turned me practical. I met with a lawyer of my own, not to race him, but to know my position if I needed it. I changed passwords on our shared financial accounts and told Damon every charge outside routine bills needed my knowledge first. I asked for a written timeline of every lawyer visit, every apartment contact, every financial move, and every conversation with anyone who knew he was considering leaving. He gave it to me 3 days later. Cedric had known he was unhappy, but not how far the planning had gone until that phone call. No affair. No second family. No hidden child. Just neglect, resentment, cowardice, and the private thrill of imagining freedom while someone else kept your home soft for you. I almost wished for a simpler villain. Cowardice in a husband is harder to explain because it can still look like gentleness from a distance. My mother did not coddle him when he came over the following Sunday to see Layla. I had told him one of my conditions for continued counseling was that he say the truth in front of at least one person who loved me. Not because I wanted to humiliate him, but because secrets grow strongest in rooms where everyone keeps helping a liar feel decent. He sat in my mother's living room with his hands clasped and told her he had secretly consulted lawyers, applied for an apartment, and used joint money without my knowledge. My mother listened the way she had listened to me, without interruption, without theatrics. When he finished, she said, "You were free to be unhappy. You were not free to be dishonest while my daughter was still building tomorrow with you." Then she told him something I will never forget. "Do not ask Vanessa to forgive the version of the story you wish had happened. Ask her to forgive what you actually did." The next 2 months were ugly in the necessary way. We kept seeing Dr. Grant, but the sessions were no longer clean little exercises in reconnection. They were blunt, difficult, and sometimes humiliating. Damon had to answer why he thought our marriage felt like a job. I had to answer whether I had stopped seeing him as a full person outside his usefulness. He admitted he had been angry at my certainty about a second child because he felt buried already and did not know how to say that without sounding cruel. I admitted that after Layla was born, I had fallen into treating logistics as love because logistics kept a family standing. But every time we uncovered some shared weakness, Dr. Grant brought us back to the line that could not be blurred. Unhappiness explained the distance. It did not excuse the hidden exit plan. That distinction saved me from gaslighting myself into equal guilt. Damon also started individual therapy because I told him marriage counseling could not be the only room where his truth showed up. At first, I did not care what he discovered there. I cared that he went. Then, over time, I saw the difference between apology and excavation. He began saying specific things instead of sentimental ones. Not, "I am sorry I hurt you," but, "I am sorry I let you grieve those pregnancy tests with a man who had already contacted lawyers." Not, "I should have communicated better," but, "I turned fear into deception because I wanted the emotional comfort of marriage while privately rehearsing escape." Specific apologies land differently. They prove the other person has finally stopped editing their own role to preserve self-respect. I did not forgive him because he cried. I began loosening my grip on fury because he stopped lying in polite language. Layla turned 8 during the 3rd month of our separation. That birthday became the first real test of whether Damon could show up without turning every family moment into a campaign for readmission. He came early to help hang decorations, but he asked before touching anything. He paid for the bounce house because he wanted to, not because he thought generosity erased betrayal. He stayed focused on Layla the whole afternoon. No speeches. No dramatic side conversations. No reaching for my hand when guests were watching. Late that evening, after the house emptied and wrapping paper was piled in bags, he stood in the kitchen doorway and said he knew he had once planned to give our daughter a second home without her mother's consent in the story, and he was ashamed of that every day. It was one of the first times his remorse sounded less like panic and more like moral comprehension. Around that same time, my job offered me a promotion to regional marketing director. Before all of this, I might have talked myself out of it because the travel would be inconvenient and the timing messy. Instead, I took it, not as a revenge glow-up, not as proof I would be fine without a husband, but because one of the things Betrayal clarifies is how often women postpone themselves to keep a household emotionally padded. Damon was the first person outside my mother that I told after signing. He looked stunned for a second, and then said he was proud of me. I told him pride was nice, but practical support would matter more. From that point on, every time I had to travel, he handled pickup schedules, packed soccer snacks, and managed bedtime without expecting applause. Reliability is not glamorous, but after deception, ordinary reliability becomes one of the few languages that still means anything. There were setbacks. One night after therapy, he said he missed me and reached for a version of comfort I was not ready to give. I pulled away, and he looked wounded. I told him wounded was not the same as wronged. Another time he got defensive when I asked to review a financial statement because he felt monitored. I reminded him that privacy had been the luxury he had misused, and trust did not regenerate on his preferred timeline. We had a brutal session after that, one of the kind that leaves your throat sore even if you do not raise your voice. He admitted he still hated being seen at his worst. I said marriage had shown me his worst whether he liked it or not. Rebuilding was going to require being visible in that ugliness without trying to outrun it. He came back to the next session less polished, more honest. That mattered. The first time I considered letting him come home was not after a grand gesture. It was after a Thursday when I got back late from Charlotte, one of my few work trips there, and found that he had picked up Layla, made her dinner, supervised homework, washed her uniform, and left a detailed note on the counter about her mild cough and the medicine he had given her, then gone back to Cedric's without trying to turn competence into romance. No flowers. No pleading. No, see how much I love this family. Just care without a sales pitch. I stood in the kitchen with that note in my hand and realized consistency was doing what words had failed to do. A month later, after another round of therapy and a written agreement about finances, transparency, and conflict, he moved back into the guest room first. Marriage, version 2, was not going to begin in our bed. It was going to begin in daylight, with terms. Coming back home did not mean the hurt vanished. It meant we were finally trying to live in truth instead of around it. Damon started taking a weekend art class because, under all his buried resentment, one of the things he had never known how to say was that he missed feeling like a person with interests instead of an efficient machine. I encouraged it, but not because I was trying to rescue him from himself anymore. I encouraged it because adults are harder to lose to secret fantasy when they have lives honest enough to speak aloud. I started going out with friends again without carrying the entire house in my nervous system. We put one evening a week on the calendar that was not about repair, parenting, or logistics. Sometimes we talked deeply. Sometimes we went silent and just walked. The difference was that silence no longer felt like concealment. We had dragged concealment into the room and made it explain itself. One of the most important conversations we ever had happened in our driveway after a soccer game, not in therapy. Layla had run ahead to the house because she needed to show me a ribbon, and Damon stayed by the car with his keys in his hand. He said, "I need you to know something that I do not want credit for." I crossed my arms and waited. He said when he toured those apartments, he kept imagining how I would pack Layla's bag for weekends and whether she would cry the first night. He said he pictured me standing in a doorway trying not to let our daughter see I had been split open. And even then he still did not stop planning. "That is the part one hate most about myself," he said. That I could see the damage and still keep walking toward it. I answered him honestly. "Good. Hate that part. Do not defend it. That is how I know you are finally facing what you did." By the 5th month, people who knew nothing probably would have said we looked good again. We laughed more. He came to Layla's games without fail. I traveled for work and came home to a husband who no longer acted like household labor was background noise. We took a quiet weekend in Charleston while my mother kept Layla, and for the first time in a long time we talked like people, not managers. Books, old dreams, fears, how aging was hitting us differently, what kind of home we wanted Layla to remember. But even there, I did not romanticize the process. On the second night, sitting on a balcony with the harbor lights below us, I told him the memory of that phone call still visited me in flashes. He said he was glad it did. I turned and looked at him. He explained that if I lost the sting too quickly, he might be tempted to call the ending grace instead of consequence. 6 months after the day everything broke, the house sounded different. Not sweeter exactly. Truer. Damon's laughter came from the kitchen one Saturday morning while he made pancakes with Layla, who was now 8 and opinionated enough to critique his heart shapes. I walked in wearing one of his old college shirts and saw the two of them dusted with flour, bickering over whipped cream, and something inside me relaxed in a way it had not in nearly a year. He kissed my cheek when I came up beside him, but there was no assumption in it anymore. Every bit of closeness between us had been rebuilt by consent. That changes the texture of affection. It becomes less careless, less entitled. I stood there watching him slide pancakes onto plates and thought about the twin bed quote, the apartment brochure, the lawyer fees, the manila folder hidden under invoices. He had almost traded all of this for the fantasy of a cleaner life. That fact did not poison the moment. It gave it weight. We ate breakfast together and planned the day. Damon had a volleyball game at 11, but he had already shifted things so he would be back for Layla's 2 o'clock match. Layla wanted a puppy and had turned the conversation into a long-running campaign that now included charts. I watched them argue playfully over whether remembering to brush your teeth counted as evidence of pet responsibility. Later, while Damon got ready, I stood at the refrigerator looking at newer photos layered over older ones. Layla on her 8th birthday with icing on her chin, me at an awards dinner after my promotion, Damon beside one of his paintings from his class showcase. The three of us in Charleston smiling with a kind of earned softness I recognized. He came up behind me and asked what I was thinking. That these pictures cost more than I knew, I said. He nodded. They did, he answered. And that is my fault. A little before we left for the game, he asked if we could talk outside for a minute. We stood near the front steps while Layla hunted for one missing shin guard inside the house. The summer air was warm and still. Damon looked more nervous than he had the day he first moved back home. "I do not want to ambush you with future plans," he said. "I know I have not earned the right to do that casually. But I need to say something out loud because hiding is what nearly ruined us." I felt my whole body go alert. He said he had been thinking about the conversations we used to have about another child, and for the first time since everything happened, he could imagine that future without feeling trapped or fraudulent. Then he stopped himself and added, "Not because I am trying to prove I stayed. Not because I am scared to lose you again. Because if we ever do that, I want it honestly. I want nothing built in secret between us ever again." I looked at him for a long moment before I answered. This was the part an easier story would rush past. The grateful wife. The healed husband. The glowing promise of a fresh baby and a repaired home. But real repair is slower and more exacting than that. "I am not saying yes today," I told him. "And I am not saying no. I am saying I hear you. I hear that you are speaking in daylight now, and that matters more than the answer itself." He nodded like he understood the privilege of even being heard on that subject. Then I said the truest thing I could give him. "The cruelest part of what you did was planning a future without me while I was still trusting you with mine. If we ever build anything else together, it will only be because you learned never to do that again." His eyes filled immediately, but he did not turn away. "I have learned," he said, "and I will keep proving it." Layla burst through the front door right then, waving the missing shin guard like a trophy and demanding to know why adults always picked the worst times to have private conversations. We laughed, and the tension eased without disappearing. That was the thing about us now. Relief no longer required pretending pain had never happened. We could hold both. At the field, Damon stood beside me under the afternoon sun and cheered himself hoarse when Layla finally scored on a hard left-foot shot she had been practicing for weeks. She ran straight toward us after the whistle, beaming so wide it almost hurt to look at her. Damon scooped her up, and I saw the pure joy on his face, the kind that no longer had a hidden apartment folded behind it. For months that was all I had wanted. Not perfection, not a pretty speech, just a life where what stood in front of me matched what was happening behind my back. On the drive home, Layla talked nonstop from the back seat about ice cream, ribbons, and whether goals should count extra if your parents screamed loud enough to embarrass you. Damon reached across the console and turned his hand upward between us, not demanding, just offering. I placed my hand in his. The city moved past the windows, familiar and changed at the same time. I did not save my marriage by ignoring what my husband had done. I saved it by dragging his deception into the light, making him answer for it, and refusing to let comfort return faster than truth. He had nearly turned our family into paperwork and alternate weekends. Instead, he learned to speak before silence made decisions for him. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I knew exactly what this second chance was worth. He had wanted a future once without telling me. If he wanted one with me now, he would keep earning it where I could see him. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.